Hello, everyone. This is Adam, and I want to give my thoughts on the Ukraine situation. Um, First, I want to respond to those reticent about defending Ukraine against the Russian invasion um, and Putin's single-handed order to invade. I just want to go over a few things, like the whole Mariupol is the city that's being destroyed the hardest, and I think I would draw the allusion to Srebrenica. Mariupol is the Ukrainian version of Srebrenica in Bosnia, um, and Putin is the equivalent of Milosevic. A lot of people are drawing the comparison to Hitler. There are, yeah, of course, there's some similarities. Uh, I do see a lot of similarities with Milosevic um, and the whole war in Bosnia and the rest of the Balkans, just like Putin's war with the rest of the former Soviet republics, Ukraine being the biggest so far, but there's been Georgia, there's been Chechnya, and many others that we haven't heard about much in the West. But I do want to address because Michael Moore has a podcast for just today, and he made the case for not interfering in the war, not intervening in the war. His argument was, well, America doesn't have the moral right to intervene because of our past history, Iraq, all of the terrible wars the US instigated, as well as slavery, as well as our massacre of Native Americans, genocide, you could call it, so that we don't have the moral right to intervene. Um, but couldn't the exact same argument have been made in World War II? We shouldn't have intervened in World War II because we had racism, we had sl- past of slavery, and we had the Native American genocide. Um, so we didn't have the right to intervene in World War II, according to extending Michael Moore's argument. That's why I think he's totally wrong. The other portion of his argument is if we did intervene, it would start World War III. That's what we're hearing. If we do a no-fly zone, it would start a nuclear war. I don't think that Putin wants to commit suicide, as evil as he is, and he is a fascist. He's the worst leader we've had. I mean, in America we have Trump as the closest thing to fascism. Yeah, there was a debate for a while. What's worse, Trump or Putin? I think Putin said, "Hold my beer." That's what the invasion was. Um, but yeah, I think Michael Moore is wrong, and I think it's wrong to say we shouldn't get involved because Ukraine's not NATO, which is a technicality. And Ukraine's under the sphere of influence of Russia. They've been an independent country for 31 years, and they've established their own independence. And, Zelensky has emerged as a hero, the like of Churchill, of de Gaulle. I mean, Churchill now, you know, who knows what will happen in the future if have a government in exile like de Gaulle. But we do know that Ukraine will emerge victorious one way or another, and Putin will lose. It might end up saying, he might end up saying, uh, you know, if we do the no-fly zone, if we intervene, when stop his war and at the same time have negotiations, he would go home to Russia and say, "I won the war," to save face, even though he lost. Um, and that, and then hopefully the Russians themselves will get rid of him and put a democracy back on the path to democracy, like they had started in the 90s. And Boris Yeltsin appointed Putin, and that was his biggest regret. In a way, it reminds me of Lenin appointing Stalin. But yeah, that was a different situation, and that's yeah, in some ways, terrible comparison. But, it's just the point that, Stalin was worse than Lenin. Putin is much worse, because Yeltsin was the democratic leader, even though he fell apart at the end with his drinking and health and other things. And he appointed you know, got the oligarchs together, consolidated the oligarch power. Um, but yeah, what else? Yeah, some other people I want to respond to are um, Lee Camp. I don't even know if I should bother because he's part of RT. But he said, "Oh yeah, of course I'm against war, but it's all NATO's fault." And that's the response from some of the left. Roger Waters, I think it's sick. Roger Waters, one of my heroes of rock, turns out to be on the wrong side of so many issues, pro Putin, and now that Putin invaded, he said, "Oh no, I'm not really pro Putin," like a lot of people have said who were pro Putin. Tulsi Gabbard is a despicable far right wing who, and she's worse than when Boebert and Taylor Greene. I call her fail or mean because, Tulsi Gabbard pretends to be a Democrat. She pretends to be a progressive, yet she's always on Fox News with Tucker Carlson, towing the Trump line, pro-Trump, pro-Putin all the way. I don't see how she's a Democrat. It's crazy. Um, at the same time, she currently has a feud with Romney, who called her a traitor for saying the U.S. has bioweapons labs, in Ukraine, which we don't, of course. Ukraine has medical labs, of course, like every other country does. They're not weapons labs. It's just like, that was the argument for Iraq, the WMD argument, you know. So like that's what the Putin propaganda is saying. Oh yeah, the U.S. has the bioweapons labs in Ukraine. It's just and of course Tulsi is propagating that lie. With regards to the war, the invasion, I, like many people who are familiar with Ukraine, and I've been there many times, mostly to Western Ukraine, I thought it was inconceivable that there would be a full-scale invasion. I thought before February 24th, I thought, no, it's not possible. Putin wouldn't be that evil, that crazy to do an invasion. I was thinking there might be a slight chance that he would invade Donbass, and well, actually, he did invade Donbass in 2014, and that border conflict has been going on since then. And then Crimea, the little green men, it was all Putin, of course, and then he called them separatists, but actually there were no separatists. There were Russians, and there were Putinites created by Putin. The war in Donbass was Putin's war. Crimea taken over by Putin before anyone knew what was happening. He took it over. It was relatively bloodless coup, but Donbass, 15,000 dead in Donbass over the past 8 years. So it wasn't like the war just started on 24th, but it was contained to that region. And, even I thought, even if he did do something, it would be eastern Ukraine, Donbass maybe. But yeah, 24th, he bombed Kiev, he bombed all the major cities. And then the last week, he bombed near the Polish border, Lviv, um, Ivan-Frankivsk, and the whole Western Ukraine region. It's not that it's being bombed on the level that Mariupol or the rest of Eastern Ukraine is, but you know, everyone thought Western Ukraine would be safe. Lviv, the safest city. That's why all the embassies moved there. Um, yeah, that's where I've traveled to mostly. It's hard to imagine Lviv being hit in with war. Currently, there is still no direct war in Lviv. It's a refugee center now. The whole city is turning into one big refugee center where they're helping the refugees and in a lot of cases going from there to the Polish border over into Poland from there. And other also the other direction is from there to Budapest, Hungary. Um, and if we, for the YouTubers, you saw Bald and Bankrupt Ben, along with Johnny, who lived in Kiev. They stayed there until the last minute, and then they had to leave after the invasion started. They made it out to Budapest just in time. Um, anyway, yeah, it's hard to believe that the bombs are going so close to Lviv. They hit what is it, 12 miles from the Polish border. And, the West is saying, don't you have one footprint into Poland, into NATO territory. But, it's a technicality. Ukraine is a Western democracy now under Zelensky, and 90% of the population is behind him. Um, it's kind of like, that's why he reminds me of Churchill, where the whole country goes behind him to support the effort to free the country from the fascist invasion. Um, yeah, I know, Russia army is so big, so powerful, but they don't have what Ukraine has, and that's the motivation to fight for freedom, and because most of the Russians know that they're fighting under a fascist who they don't support, but they have no choice to, and it's the Russians, the people in the Russian army. Zelensky is right; they should surrender, and because they know, you know, the enemy of the Russians and the Ukrainians is Putin and his inner circle. That's the real enemy, not the Russians themselves. Um, but um, yeah, and then on the right, of course, Trump is pro-Putin, and Tucker Carlson, and you know, and certain people of the Trump wing of the Republican Party, which unfortunately is a very big part of the party now. So I'm not sure exact. I know that some Republicans are now supporting Ukraine, and there's a split in the Republican Party. Finally, yeah, no, we don't want to start World War III. We don't want to escalate the war into Europe. But the way to stop the escalation is to defend Ukraine any way possible, not just the limitations we have, the sanctions, the sanctions against the oligarchs, to stop seize their yachts, seize their mansions, and which could cause them to overthrow Putin. We have to go further than that. We have to defend Ukraine. NATO has to defend Ukraine. We need a no-fly zone, just because the Russians currently have free reign bombing Ukraine whenever they want, wherever they want, because we've seen, all the way to the Polish border. Um, who knows how much longer Lviv would be safe. Um, I just think we got to defend Ukraine any way possible. And, I think Michael Moore who I agree with in many ways, he's totally wrong in this regard that because he was making jokes on his podcast. Do you want your son to die for Chernobyl? Do you want your kids to die for Odessa? And, again, exactly the same argument could have been made against World War II. Do you want, what does Europe have to do with America? And that's, I know Michael Moore is more open-minded than that, but, there was the America First movement, which, of course, Trump adopted in a way. Who cares about the rest of the world? It's just America. And, and that wasn't even valid in the 30s and 40s. Now we're 70, 80 years later. So, we're that much more global with, especially with all the technology we have now. Everything is globalized. And how can we let Putin take us back to the 19th century? Yeah, that's what he's doing. He wants to get not just the former Soviet Union back, like a Soviet Union back, because he's really a czar. He wants he wants to be an imperial king and rule over Europe, at least Eastern Europe and the former Soviet republics, all under his domain. I don't. He's crazy. He's 70 years old, uh, which is 5 years older than the average lifespan of the average Russian male. Um, and he thinks he wants to go down in history as a Peter the Great, one of those great kings of history. But he's going to go down in history as 21st century Hitler, or Milosevic. He's already proved that because how many thousands have died in the past 3 weeks, and then 15,000 over the past 8 years in Donbass. And I think that Ukraine will win one way or another. You know, probably because Zelensky's having negotiations, and somehow they will negotiate. Putin will realize he lost. He'll go back to Russia, tell everyone he won, and no one will believe him, but they'll pretend they do because they're scared of him. And at some point, the oligarchs or the Russian people will get rid of him and continue with reinstalling democracy, hopefully. All right. That's it for now. I'll have more to say later. Have a good night and good luck to all Ukrainians.